Hello, everyone. This is Jill here to give the Purdue versus Washington postgame recap. Final score being Purdue 81, Washington 73. This was a game in Mackey Arena, so the expectation, I think, was with Washington being an away opponent, especially from the West Coast, that it'd be a really crazy beatdown from some, and that it was going to be kind of a gimme game for Purdue. Didn't end up looking like that from the score, but I would say that Purdue kept Washington kind of at an arm's length away throughout the entire game. And of course, this is Big Ten play, so every game is basically a 50-50 chance to win in my books. And I think from my perspective, I didn't have much knowledge on what Washington was looking like for this season, so I had very little thoughts on how this game would play out before I watched. And then as I was watching the game, a lot of the announcers and, discussions were around Washington's injuries, and they were dealing with a limited roster, and they also have a tendency to make really big comebacks in the second half. So as the game was progressing, that's what I was kind of keeping an eye on and wondering if that was going to happen here. It seemed like it wouldn't because we had a very significant lead. And in some instances, I would say I didn't really expect them to ever take their foot off the gas pedal when it comes to being the aggressor. But lo and behold, that was kind of the case in the second half. I think there were a couple things that contributed to it, but it was really interesting to see that happen to Purdue. And it was also, I would say, a strange game because from the stat perspective, Purdue played well. They shot 56% from field, 36% from three, out rebounded Washington 35-22, and had 6 steals, a couple blocks. It was a pretty efficient game from that perspective. The biggest difference is going to be we started to get into foul trouble and turnovers. We had 14 by the end of the game. When I think to start the game, Washington had 7 turnovers and Purdue had 1. So a really big difference between the turnovers taking care of the basketball and the points off turnovers. And what really turned this into quote unquote a close game was the turnovers that Purdue created led 2 points for Washington. I think that was, again, just something that happens, and I'm not too concerned about it. Every team has these interesting wins where it's closer than it actually is, and I would say that an 8-point win is pretty good in my books. I think what makes it seem like it's really bad is that we were up by 20 at one point, and then the game we were only up by 8. But what this game did give us is an opportunity to see how Purdue plays when star players are, 1, not doing well, and 2, can't be playing because of foul trouble, and showed us what kind of depth we have in those situations. So Braden Smith in the first half had 3 fouls, so he was immediately taken out after he got his third, and Painter said that he wasn't coming in until the 16-minute mark in the second half because of it. So that gave Omer Meyer an opportunity to really play and run the game for Purdue. And while it wasn't necessarily as seamless as it would be for Braden Smith, he did a great job at, kind of running the offense and, giving the team an opportunity to play and still score and make shots and keep Washington at bay. And even during that time, he did really well. And, they were able to really keep the game in front of them or keep their opponents in front of them like that. Fletcher Loyer was also really quiet in this game. He had 3 points for the majority of the game and then had 2 free throws that he shot at the end. And so, without our best shooter, how do we perform? I think we did pretty well. CJ Cox kind of picked up his slack and scored 11 points there. There were a lot of really good points in the paint by Daniel Jacobson, Oscar Cluff, TKR. TKR had a great game, 14 points, 14 rebounds, 6 assists. He was really starting to threat the triple-double. And I think, had he been in longer, I think he could have done it, honestly. Braden Smith had 23 points and 7 assists, which is, the assist number is probably not as high as we'd expect, but the points certainly kept him as a star in this game, even though he was sitting down for a lot of the game. So I think it was great to see him be really aggressive and looking for a shot. I think there were some moments where he got a little too aggressive and just put up a quick jumper when maybe we should have run an offense. That led to some really quick possessions and then gave Washington an opportunity to score and get the game closer than it should have been. I enjoyed this game from the perspective that we were able to win at home against Washington, which, very tall and athletic team. I think they may not have all the pieces together right now, like the announcers have said, where they've got really good players. They just haven't been able to all play together at the same time due to injuries and whatnot. But they all have, again, they just have good players that are athletic and can still make plays even when they're limited in their abilities right now. And to get a solid win like that was good to see, but then also to show we still have some work to do, because I think my hope is that throughout the season that the team maintains this aggressive pursuit for their goals and doesn't take teams like Washington or Penn State coming up as an opportunity to quote unquote slack off. So yeah, this was an interesting game. I still am trying to like wrap my head around it, and maybe I have to watch it again to really understand what was happening. I think the biggest things that I took away from it was a great opportunity for our players to, go deeper in the bench to find players opportunities to play for longer and to be really efficient on the offense and defense, especially when we don't have players to necessarily rely on to come back if we're not doing well. Had it gotten into a point where Braden Smith had 4 fouls or even fouled out, what would we do? How would we handle that? And can our bench like perform and, pick up the slack? I think they can, and I think they did show that here. And really, the next thing is take care of the basketball. Why did we have 14 turnovers in a game against Washington? Like at the end of the game, Washington had less turnovers than Purdue, and they started the first half, they had like 9. So that shouldn't be happening, and that's something that certainly needs to get better. But it also seemed like an anomaly. I don't think these turnovers were standard for Purdue. The other thing is foul trouble. That was a bit of a surprise to me. Not necessarily like every player had 3 or more fouls, but they came at random times, especially in the second half. It really threw the momentum of the game off. So when that happens, how does the team respond? Try and play tough D, try not to let any pesky defenders get in their heads and make them, do an offensive foul or anything like that. So the mental game from the foul or the reffing standpoint is something that kind of came up again in this game. It reminded me a little bit of the Memphis game in particular. That's something that hopefully we can kind of figure out and get a solid understanding of as Big Ten season rolls around. Big Ten's a very physical conference, so the expectation is that it's going to be a lot of like bully basketball down in the paint. So we'll see if that leads to a lot more fouls being called or letting a lot of things go. We'll see. I'm, hopeful that the game still has a natural cadence to it, and that this was an anomaly, hopefully, because I personally did not love the officiating of this game. But yeah, hard one to wrap my head around. I'll certainly have to kind of rewatch this one, but nice thing is we got the win in the books. We get to move on. We get to focus on the next opponent, which is going to be Penn State back in Mackey Arena on Saturday, January 10th. Should be a fun game to watch. Penn State's always an interesting character. I think they almost beat Michigan the other day, so they are certainly not someone to overlook, and as are all of the Big Ten opponents. So should be a good one to watch and to tune into. Until then, boiler up, have a good day. I'll see you in the next one.